Hey, what's going on, ADPI Nation? We're back with part two of an episode with Keegan Wetzel. Um, guys, we wanted to do this part two because we started the podcast off really, really great, and we had like, I don't know, I mean, if you're a longtime listener of the show, you kind of like picked up on like the vibe of each episode. Like some episodes are different, but the general vibe is like, what's your military background? And then we talk about real estate, and then we kind of go in the bonus round, and that's cool, and we like that vibe, with some things thrown in there that extra tidbits. But we were supposed to do that with Keegan last time, and we got like a quarter way through, and we're like, whoa, no, this is too good. We just got to keep digging. And then before I looked down, I was like, oh my god, we've been going for so long. We're gonna have to have you on for a part two. So graciously, Keegan has decided to join us again to cover part two. So literally what we're going to do is we're going to pick up where we left off. So if you haven't listened to part one of the Keegan Wetzel interview, I recommend it. Go ahead and listen to that one first, because it'll make a heck of a lot more sense on what we're doing. And that episode is episode 299. So 299. Listen to that episode. You get an idea of where Keegan, his background, being a football player at the Naval Academy, and then trying to go pro, and then but mostly there's just so many nuggets in there on transitioning and having the right mindset and unlocking your freedom. And Keegan, you even said it yourself. You had like a whole bunch of people just contact you on Instagram and phone and email and everything just to hear more of that story, right?
Yeah, it's been so reaffirming, man. I've been a longtime follower of ADPI, kind of, I think, from a periphery stance, because I maybe started my investing journey about the time that ADPI was getting going. So I would do something, and then 3 months later, I'd see Mark Yan like post something on it, right? Or like something come out. So it's been really fulfilling for me to get to feel like the journey that I've had is valuable to other people. And then, I probably had 10 or 15 people reach out in the last week that have wanted to learn more or receive help with like a specific deal, or hey, can you give me your mindset on how would you approach this, A versus B? That's been so rewarding, because I didn't feel like I had that person to go to. So for other people to have that through ADPI and to be able to be that vehicle and that vessel for other people has been, that's everything to me. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about last time, one of your kind of key things that you look for more so than anything else besides finances and money and all, and even freedom, it's positive relationships. It's having these positive relationships. And I'm so glad that I wish more of the listeners, because we have thousands of listeners, I wish more of them would reach out to you, but I'm glad that 10 or 15 or however many did reach out to you, because those are the action takers. So if you're listening to part two of this and you listen to part one, you're like, dang, I should have reached out to Keegan. I wonder if anyone actually reaches out to people reach out. And like Keegan gives away, like in the show notes. So you can go to episode 299 and go and scroll down to the show notes, and it's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on wherever you listen to podcasts. Literally his Instagram is right there. You can slide into his DMs. I think his phone number is there. Just text the dude. Like, just, we give as much as we can, because that's what this podcast is about. It's about helping you guys and girls out there get educated and start taking action. So where I want to pick this up, Keegan, is we talked about your transition, and we talked about you decided that you were going to go and get licensed as an agent, and we were just touching the surface or scratching the surface on like what you look for in deals. And for listeners who listen to episode 299, they know that you're in San Diego, which is a difficult market to get started in. So for people who are like, in San Diego, they're stationed in San Diego or something, and they're looking to like, I want to get started in investing, but these numbers just don't make sense or anything. I mean, you're still taking down deals in San Diego. So what are you doing that's different, and how can these folks get more involved in the process?
Oh, big time. Yeah. I'm so bullish on San Diego, which came in such a roundabout way. I bought that first 3 unit here because I needed a place to live. And then I added that 4th unit to it. And I lost a bunch of money hiring an architect that went bankrupt in the process. So I've made lots of mistakes, and I know who not to use, and have hopefully developed a good network of people to use. And then I was kind of looking at this blue ocean of potential. You've got wholesale deals, you've got flippers, you've got all these hot markets, right? Everybody's talking about Austin or Salt Lake City or Boise, or especially South Florida. Augusta, Georgia is a hot market. I'm like, where should I go? What should I do? And I've done a lot along the way, and we can hit on like why I was looking to add these different things to my portfolio, what the end goal was. But generally speaking, throughout my investment journey, I had kind of an epiphany, like literally in the shower moment. I was 1030 winning out of one deal, looking for the next one. And I just spread myself so thin on all these different things. Commercial syndications, Airbnbs, multifamily, single family, flips, wholesale deals. I'd done all of it in like 18 months, right? And I was like, but what's the thing? What do I actually care about? Mm-hmm. And to your question, I came to the realization that the most valuable thing I could do was to improve real property or add more livable square feet. And doing so in a low cap rate market, so a high cost market or a high value market like San Diego, was going to be my best opportunity to add to my net worth. And that's the main figure I focus on when coaching or working with clients is net worth. People focus on, I talked about Grant Cardone, number of doors, or you can look at cash on cash or your ROI or cash flow. I tend to err towards, and we can hit on it if you want to, net worth and why that's important and why I think that's the most operational figure. But I realized literally in the shower, and I came out like an aha moment. My cousin Stu was here and my wife were in the living room, and I don't even think I'd put a shirt on, just shorts. I was like, I've got it. I know what the next move is,
Glad
like
you put
the
shorts
eureka
on.
moment, at least shorts. And for me, it was like, you can improve livable square feet for $60 to $80 a square foot. I can build more livable square feet for $250 to $300 a square foot. But in San Diego, it's going to appraise at $800 a square foot, $1,000 a square foot, $1,200 a square foot. And a bank's going to lend me money on that appraised value. So my margin there is massive. So taking down deals here and continuing to add value here in San Diego, which is a market I believe in, military, defense, healthcare, education, biotech. Mm-hmm. I think we've got a really good fundamental basis for the economy here. I was like, San Diego's where I'm going to continue to invest. And that was maybe 2 years ago when I had that moment. And so it's been like all in focus, shifting my assets back to San Diego. And how you continue to take down deals here, in my opinion, is small residential multifamily, 2 to 4 units with as little cash out of pocket as possible. So it's a VA loan for our veterans. It's an FHA loan if you've exhausted your VA loan or if you're not a veteran. FHA loans are largely going to be capped at 2 units because of the self-sustainability rule. But I've got a whole process I take FHA buyers through where I want to look for the ability to convert an uninhabitable but already built space into an ADU in certain zoning where we can permit quickly, then refinance them to a commercial, get that FHA freed up and do it again. And so got a whole process there. But that's my mindset on coming back to San Diego.
Oh man, that's super interesting. Yeah. And there's, I think what would drive a lot of people away, like you talked about this low cap rate market. I mean, that's why, for even for the fund at ADPI Capital, we won't even look really in San Diego or New York City or anything like that because it just doesn't make sense for these large commercial properties. I mean, they just take too long to turn around and it wouldn't really make sense. Now, development, that's a different story. But ultimately, yeah, I agree with you on the market fundamentals. I mean, you have a diverse economy, which is something that you definitely want to look at. If you're looking at a market to invest in, you obviously don't want it to be just military or just healthcare or just something. You want, God forbid the hospital closes down or the base, closes down or something like that, then your whole economic base goes with it. That's a problem. Yeah, but totally. And then also it's San Diego. I mean, the climate is amazing and people aren't going anywhere. Like it is a very attractive city. And people are even moving there from LA still and kind of making that journey southward. But yeah, Keegan, so like, let's kind of talk more about this process of you finding these small multifamilies and this whole ADU process. So additional dwelling, or accessory dwelling unit. Is that the correct terminology?
Yeah, I think so. Now that you say it, you make me second guess. I don't actually know.
Is it additional? Is it accessory? Whatever. But like, yeah, the process of, I mean, it's easy to conceptualize in my head. You go and there's a duplex there. There's extra space on the property. I mean, in Georgia, this used to be a thing. They would call them carriage houses, right? Or mother-in-law suites or whatever. But they were already built. What you're doing is you're physically developing this extra unit, and this is totally legal zoning wise because San Diego has a housing crisis, right? Is that the idea?
Exactly. Yeah. As I understand it, because I know the ADU law is really well out on the West Coast. The West Coast is pretty forward leaning on this to solve the housing crisis problem or to increase housing density. Now you can, in a lot of these areas, because zoning has changed, just do a by right second permitted unit and convert a garage or add an additional unit or whatever it is. And when I say garage, a lot of these have like 4 single car garages. So we're not talking about like 300 square feet, right? We're talking about like pretty substantial size units, up to 1,200 square feet. But San Diego is really, really forward leaning on establishing this. In LA or Seattle or other cities on the West Coast, as I understand it, the ADU laws are still largely being figured out. It's kind of a case by case thing. San Diego took a stance on this a couple of years ago. And if anybody wants to go look it up, it's the DSD Bulletin 400. And there's been some additional revisions to that, which is the spark notes effectively on the building codes for ADUs in San Diego. And that tells you if you're RS or RM zoned. The other thing I love is when an agent lists a house and they say it's R1. I'm like, oh, honey, there hasn't been R1 zoning in San Diego since 2019. Like, so they just don't know what they're doing. So I already know what I have. So RS or RM zoning, and then there's a density figure after that. So RM11, RS 37, which I don't even think is a zone, but blah, blah, blah. These ADU laws are really well established in San Diego, and it's the fastest and cheapest way to permit additional development is just by going the ADU route instead of like a legal second unit. It's a legal ADU. It is a second unit. An appraiser is going to look at that and give you a 1025 appraisal instead of a 1024. 1024 is single family. 1025 is the Fannie Mae residential income property, so 2 to 4 units. I think that is the fastest way to develop. Well, the fastest way is just improving property because it's easier to paint and do new countertops and cabinets than it is to build additional livable square feet. So kind of phase one for me when I'm helping clients get into something, if we're looking at an equity play and really focusing on that net worth figure, is the opportunity for some improvements. A fully renovated flip is nice because you're going to get top dollar rents at day one, but that isn't what everyone's looking for. A lot of people are willing to put in a little bit more elbow grease, And so improvements first and foremost. Secondly, a cheaper conversion that I can help them do. If I can convert garages or unhabitable space into by right legal ADUs, that could be garages, gyms, leasing offices. There's a whole list, and I can help people sift through the bulletin to find this. You're going to be able to convert that at $220, $230, $250 a square foot. And in a lot of these zip codes, you're appraising at, again, $700, $800, $900 a square foot. And then if you have space.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say,
kind of phase
like
3 would be like the additional building additional units. So you kind of have like 3 phases there that are separate.
Yeah. So to me, and I'm sorry to interrupt, it sounds like a positive arbitrage almost, like what I do with short-term rentals, where you go and rent for whatever, for example, say $1,000 a month, and then you have it as a short-term rental, and it's making $4,000 a month, and you take a positive arbitrage. Like in this case, you're doing a positive arbitrage on the development side, where you're saying, hey, I know it costs $250, $300 a square foot to do this, which from an outsider's view is like, golly, that's like a lot of money, like $300 a square foot to go and develop something.
Right.
But then you're going and saying, oh, well, I know it's going to appraise at $700 or $800 a square foot. So as long as you can manage that development project and keep it on a timeline and make sure your lenders get paid, your construction loan gets paid, and all of this stuff, and your holding costs are locked down, then yeah, you like you said, the bank is going to go and loan on $800 a square foot, and you're taking a positive arbitrage on that play, and then you own the property, and then hopefully you're still cash flowing and stuff like that, or or whatever, you're putting another tenant in there or whatever. So Keegan, with these opportunities in these ADUs, because I really want to dig more into the legal side of it, because I think it's really interesting. Yeah. A lot of the times in other markets, like you were alluding to, is like they're not really the ADU laws. Like everyone knows that there's a housing crisis in the U.S. And if you compare the United States, if listeners have been to, I'm sure, many other countries, but even just going to Europe, and you see that the population density in cities in Europe is significantly higher than it is in the United States. Like for people in Europe, getting a house with like land is not really a thing. Most people live in apartments their whole lives. Like that's just what they do. In America, it's not really like that. It's kind of like you go and you live in the city, and then you kind of go out to the suburbs and you buy that house and you do, whatever. But because of that mentality and the need for housing, cities now all around the country, around the US, are facing this problem. Like, man, we've put in these zoning laws to protect property and reduce population density because we thought everyone wanted to be in the suburbs, but it turns out not necessarily the case. Like people want to be in the cities now, and we don't have the housing for them, or the laws are written in a way that we can't build the housing. So
For a long
with
time,
yeah.
yeah, the requirements are just prohibitive. Like you want to add a unit, you have to add like 4 parking spaces and like 18 trees and like all this silly stuff, right? And they're going to like really prohibit where you can build on your own lot. So a
Mhm.
lot of that has been alleviated. This ADU advent in San Diego is so advantageous. And there's going to be other laws that change in the future that I'll adjust to. But right now, this is the honey hole, in my opinion. And if you have a VA loan, it's the easiest way to acquire property where you can do this. And I've really got like a zoning map and a criteria that I focus on. But with ADUs, in most zones in San Diego, you don't have to provide any extra parking. You can take building all the way back to your rear and side lot setbacks, which you can't do when building by right units, but you can do with ADUs. So you get use of way more of your lot, which allows you to actually build more units. If you tap into some overlays, you can build at a higher density, which means you can build more units. Like if you're in a certain overlay, the amount of ADUs you can build per lot is unlimited. The only requirement is that you don't exceed your floor area ratios, which is to say, like if it's a 1.0 ratio and you have a 6,000 square foot lot, the max livable square feet you could have is 6,000 livable square feet. If it's a 2.0 ratio, you can have 12,000 livable square feet, et cetera, et cetera. So the ability to develop there is really strong. So then you run into like, okay, well, where do I get the cash to develop? There's companies that have figured this out that I'm tapped into and using now that I'm really excited about, who are funding 100% of the ADU build with 12-month deferred
Wow.
payments. So that ideally you can build and
Wow.
refinance before ever making an interest payment.
Wow. So that's incredible.
We kind
So
of went 0 to 100 there because there's like a few steps in between, like just painting and remodeling the kitchen, right? But I want to set people up so that they have the $25,000 forced equity play when they get in the property, but also the $500,000 to $1 million forced equity play because they have that asset. And if they don't do it, a developer is going to pay them more for it for having that piece of property, right? So I want to set people up to have the short, medium, and long-term play.
yeah. So it's like value add on steroids is like pretty much what we're talking about. Because in my experience, I'm a value add investor. I buy a quadplex here. You do the insides, you do the countertops, the paint, do what you need to do, but you're able to increase the rent and and increase the value of the entire property, and it's great. But we never added units. Adding units would be like crazy add like crazy value add play, which is exactly what you're talking about. But being able to do
I think it's
everything
just
in
the
one
next
go,
step.
yeah, it is.
I mean, 15
uh
years ago, how many people our age owned like 8 single family homes?
mhm.
Not very
Yeah.
many. That was 15 years ago, right? People in their 20s, 30s, and 40s didn't own like a portfolio of real estate. Fast forward just 15 or 20 years, and it's kind of mainstream. And I think like the next advent is going to be like residential people working a W-2 job being able to add units to their either primary residence or their investment properties. I think it's just the next step along the proliferation of real estate becoming more achievable for the average American, and the average American's knowledge of how to create wealth for themselves and their family, and the goal to create generational wealth becoming a stalwart in that family household. That's my belief.
Yeah. No, that's man, I love this. I love having these discussions, and going back to your point on this 100% financing thing. I mean, that's incredible. So just breaking that down, and let's use an example here, and maybe you have one, but actually, let me ask you: do you have an example of someone, or maybe yourself, of using one of these 100% financing? Like, can you walk us through a deal that was like, hey, I got this triplex, and I use 100% financing to add a unit to it. Now it's 4 units. Is that like a thing that you've done?
Yeah, I'm in the process right now. So we haven't exited it yet. We haven't even started construction, but I'm really excited about it. And we can walk through it if you want to.
Yeah, yeah. Let's do that.
I've done like smaller 1 units, but I bought a 4 unit for about 1.7 million in San Diego a handful of months ago. And I bought it intentionally with the zoning and overlays that I wanted and the uninhabitable spaces already existing that would be cheaper to convert. So it's 2 separate structures. It's 4 3-bed, 1-baths in one structure. And 2 of those were renovated, 2 weren't. So the plan is to get in, renovate those 2 that aren't, increase the rents by $900 a unit, and then you'll be at a decent cash flow position to cover your debt service right away. Then there's a separate structure kind of split level on a hill like this with 4 single car garages. It's already got electrical, it's already got gas going to it, and it's already got plumbing going to it. So a very cheap conversion to additional units. But because of the density and just I've worked really hard to know the building code laws, because it's like a flow chart. Like, I'm going to tap into this ADU bonus program to convert the uninhabitable spaces. But once I converted those garage, I was already maxed on my floor area ratio. But I wanted to add more units. So I was able to tap into a different code in RM zoning that says I can add at least 2 units, 2 ADUs to every property, and or I get one that's at least 800 square feet. Yada, yada, ipso facto. I was able to use like 3 or 4 different codes here overlaid to build 4 additional 1 bed, 1 bath units. So I'm converting the 4 garages into 2 units, and then I'm building a second level on top. And it's really cool because the 2 units on bottom have an entrance from south facing side, and the 2 units on top have an entrance from the north facing side. So they're very private as well. And they'll all have in-unit washers and dryers. They'll all have nice kitchens. So I've gone through design and structural for those 4 additional units. So I'm almost through the full design phase, and I know about what the costs are there. The next phase for me will be submitting those permits to the city. You have a handful of costs that go along with that. School and development impact fees, water. I'll need to add solar. That's a requirement in Southern California, which I'm not that mad about. I think it's good for those properties and to have that offset. And it adds value as well, because there's potential additional income there from putting things on site that are going to run on solar, like coin-operated laundry machines, et cetera, et cetera. Once we get those permits submitted, then I'll actually go into finalizing my quotes for construction. But I've evaluated this through a couple of general contractors to get different quotes. I'm probably going to go with one that's a little bit more expensive than the mean. The mean is probably about $275 a square foot. The one I'm selecting has a couple of clauses I like. No change orders, which means once you sign at their cost, they will never change that cost on you, which I like a lot. And they'll guarantee me rent for those units 18 months from the day they start construction. Wow. So even if they don't finish, for things that are unforeseen, that are their own fault or not, the city changes codes and they have to like go back and redo something, they're going to guarantee me rental income. And using a couple of unsecured second lien lenders, I'm going to be able to finance 100% of this, maybe just a hair under for this project, with 18 months deferred payments from one and 12 months deferred payments from the other. So if I'm not able to refinance and pay that off, then I'll pay the interest on that deferred time period. But if I pay it off before my deferred time period is over, then I actually don't pay any fees at all. And the way that those lenders make money is through my general contractor. I'm sure there's a buffer built in there that's paying some like discount points or whatever for the money. But I'm looking at about $304 a square foot. It's like $515,000 total to build these 4 units. So I'm in acquisition at 1.7. I'm putting about $40,000 into renovations on the existing units. Acquisition is actually closer to like 1.65 something. So we'll call it in 1.7 with the renovations on the 2 units that are existing. Then we're building, we'll call it $500,000 worth of additional units. That's 2.2.
Sure.
If we estimate a pretty moderate cap rate, like 5.5, which is probably generous, it'll probably sell closer to like a 4.5. So if we estimate a 5.5, I've got my exit valuation on this at 2.9. If we're at a 5% cap rate, we're at 3.15. So your profit margin here is like $700,000 to $950,000 on what I feel like is relatively conservative. And I'm using, if I did this on my VA loan, which I did not, but if I did, I could have effectively used $0 of my own money except for the cost of my inspection and appraisal, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. That is completely mind blowing, because what you're talking about is, I mean, and to summarize this, we're talking about, well, let me go back here. Your exit strategy is when these 4 additional units, because it is kind of like 2 projects in one. Like the first phase 1, if you will, is renovating those first 2 units that they need a little TLC. Nothing wrong with that. Classic value add investing. We're gonna go in there. We're gonna bump the rents. Cool. That's normal. At that point, are you gonna try to refinance and keep these projects separate, or are you just gonna let that be and then go and get these projects underway? Are they going to happen simultaneously? Like, are the contractors who are building these 4 units also doing the work on the 2, or what does that look like?
Lots of questions there. So I'm going to let the finance be. I've got 30-year fixed debt on the property,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm surviving that debt bill, not by a whole lot, but surviving that debt bill just with the 4 units as is. So once we do the TLC and bump the rents, we'll be totally fine. I like that 30-year fixed financing. Who knows what's going to happen with the Fed the next 5 years, especially, or even like the next 6 months, So I like
Yeah.
leaving that as is. The contractors that are doing those TLC renovations are kind of like my handyman crew, who come up from TJ or the good old boys from San Diego, and we're getting in there. It'll be quick and dirty in 7 days. And those guys are fantastic. And I've had that crew do 2 other extensions and home renovations for me. We're not doing anything major there. We're not changing any electrical or plumbing. It's pretty simple stuff.
All cosmetic.
Yep. I'm running in parallel with that, designing and permitting. I'm using a veteran-owned company here in San Diego. The CEO's a guy I got to know when he was working at a different company, and then he started his own. So I really, really like them. The company's called Lifehouse SD. I'll connect anybody with CJ that wants a free estimate. He's fantastic. Navy
awesome.
veteran, really good dude. So they're running plans and permits for me, and then I'm competing a couple of general contractors for the job, and that'll be all licensed GCs that do that work. Then
Right.
we'll see what interest rates look like in 12 to 18 months. Maybe I'll refinance and keep the project and cash flow it. Maybe I'll sell it in 1031 because I'll be able to pull out 1.4, 1.6 million from the 1031. Then I can go get 20 units if I want to, and you can play that game as long as you want to. So out of every 2 or 3 I do like this, I'll probably hold. I like to hold 2, sell 1 out of every 3. That's kind of probably going to be the pace of play. That might sound intimidating to listeners, though. My thought process on that is just, I don't really want cash flow. I just want to drive net worth. So I want to drive value. And if I can exit a property and then 1031 and not pay taxes and get something much bigger that's going to be able to continue to drive equity for me, I'll do that. Otherwise, once I complete a project, I don't really want to sell it because I'm going to lose margin on the sale through transaction costs, and the IRS is going to get their hands on 15 or 20% or more. So if I can just refinance it and take debt, I'd much rather do that and not really cash flow the property extremely strongly. Like everybody's on this Airbnb craze. To be honest, Kevin, I'm kind of over it. I've done it. I've been there. I've rode the ride, got the t-shirt. Like I'm kind of over it unless it's a really small unit in a great location. Then I like the velocity behind it. But I would rather do something bigger, take debt from, a large institution that's going to collateralize that, a big bank. I'm not going to have to pay taxes on any of that money I get, which is going to more than pay for all the money I put into the project and give me cash to go into the next project. And you're increasing your net worth through these deals at like, $1 million every 15, 18 months per deal. I just don't know anywhere else that you can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's kind of like trampoline investing, right? You're using this as a jump off point, and you're taking the profits from that and trampolining and jumping into a potentially bigger deal. And using the 1031 exchange, you're able to defer those taxes, and you could potentially kick that can down the road until you die, and then your tax basis gets reset, and it's all good. It's a really awesome strategy, and I think for a lot of folks, you're giving a lot of people a lot of hope right now, Keegan, and people who are in high markets and thinking, oh God, I can't do this. I mean, this might even be applicable for like where I'm at in Washington, DC, a very high market, high square foot, like very similar market to San Diego as far as the cap rates are low. The values are just extremely high. The economic base, it's extremely diverse, and it's not going anywhere. It's fed by the government. It is literally not going anywhere. So like, yeah, there might be opportunities here, but I don't know for a fact, but I would argue that the population density in Washington, D.C. is probably higher than that of San Diego. D.C. is relatively dense. So, I'm not, and we don't have the ADU kind of thing.
I would think it's got to be way more dense. Yeah. What I like about San Diego is that the ratio of 2 to 4 unit properties to the population density is the highest on the West Coast. So that gives me like veterans and people using an FHA loan, buying a duplex at 1.2, 1.25, $1.3 million. Like there's a lot of hope there. One, if you got a VA loan, your competition in the $600,000 to $800,000 bracket for a single family home is ridiculous, right? My buddy who's a real estate agent, wrote a 50% down offer on a $750,000 house in the Claremont neighborhood in San Diego last week.
50% down,
50% cash, 50.
Wow.
Pretty strong offer. 44 offers on that property.
What?
44 offers. They were number 17 is what he was told. I don't know if there's any truth to that. I don't know how, like after number 3, you stop counting. You don't rank them after that. So I don't know.
Well,
but
so obviously it's just like all cash.
All cash, no contingencies, 10-day close. If you want a single family house for $750,000, that's what it looks like, right? Wow. If you're in the $1.2 million bracket, 3 offers max per house, right? On a duplex. And FHA loans are largely going to be capped on a duplex for something I can dive into. It's called the self-sustainability rule. And I can help people understand that, but there's still an angle there. I can give you a good duplex deal in a second. That's what I did, but maybe a little bit more lightweight, a little bit more like first-time home buyer friendly or second-time home buyer. If you're a VA buyer, like if I got an 04 Navy officer right now who's pre-qualified for 1.7 million. I mean, those houses are on the market for 30, 45 days getting one offer. So you've greatly separated yourself from the competition. And in my opinion, the upside's way bigger. Plus you have a $1.2 or $1.5 million or $1.8 million asset working for you, as opposed to the $750,000 house. So your compound annual growth is going to be, it's not going to be double. That compound growth over a 12 or 15 year period is going to be quadruple or 5x what it would be on the
I mean, you could set yourself,
house.
You can, with one purchase in theory, assuming that you kept your W-2 and maybe you worked through retirement or something like that, you can set your a generation of kids up with that kind of money. 12, 15 years down the road.
And I've built a custom cash flow calculator that'll look at your near term as a long term and a short term rental. And then it also helps you calculate 3 other things. 1, your 10-year net worth growth, which I think is the most operative metric that I look at when evaluating a deal. And I'm happy to share this calculator with any of your listeners. Thirdly, your debt to income ratio to know about what you're going to qualify for. Fourthly, it helps you calculate your exit strategy so that you know, based on that light value add, or if it's got to be a much bigger project to get to an exit strategy, sell or refinance, where you need to get to. And that helps give me a well-rounded picture of an investment and what it's worth to me or to a client.
Yeah, man, this is really awesome. I want to dig in next for our listeners. We kind of talked about it at the top of the show, but your mindset. You talked about how net worth is really where you're at. Why net worth versus cash on cash, or versus monthly cash flow, or versus whatever other like we teach our students. I mean, your criteria is personal to you, but you have to set your criteria. That's like literally one of the first things you do when you get started investing is learn criteria and set your criteria. So like, why for you, Keegan, is net worth growth more important than some of the more standard criteria metrics that we've seen in the industry?
Yeah, great question, Kevin. I think, and I'm open for any debate and feedback on this, but this first part probably won't be open to much debate and feedback, but my result I think would be, I think your goals have to align with your values. And we talked a lot on the first episode about what I really value is time. And ideally, you can use that time to make a positive, impactful, meaningful relationship with as many or as few people as you want to. But I think those relationships are really the only thing you're going to leave on this earth, right? Alex Hormozi has this famous Instagram video that starts off with like, someday you're going to die and no one's even going to remember your name. So what are you doing today? And well, it's maybe a little bit stoic or even like nihilistic. I tend to love that mentality. So when I was starting to invest, I bought an Airbnb in the Tahoe area, bought a couple single family homes in Alabama. I bought a couple wholesale deals. I did my first commercial syndication. We did 97 units in Oklahoma. I did a joint venture. We did 40 units in the Birmingham, Alabama area. We did a boutique hotel in Coronado that's 7 units in Southern California. That's amazing. That property's performing fantastic, but I got so spread thin. I wasn't very deep in any of these. I was just so spread thin. I did another Airbnb in Oceanside, California. And I had to really look when I had that like eureka in the shower moment about what do I want to do? I had to really look at like what's most important to me. And Airbnbs are great. You can pull in $1,500, $2,000 a month cash flow, sometimes more. but regulations, variability there, it was just becoming so much of a headache. The first year I permitted my Tahoe place, it cost like $350. This past year was like $2,500, and they're limiting permits, and it's just becoming such a hassle where I was like, if we make 25 grand a year, is that going to change our lives forever? Like,
Yeah.
probably not. And so when I really looked at what my values were time, the way that I could get my time back, I felt like, was by having both the ability to not have to actively put my time into a W-2 or an active form of income, but also have the ability to borrow against my assets and arbitrage that money. And what I mean is I looked at like, what do I really want to do? I looked at those big impactful things, nonprofits, coaching high school football, being involved in our church, being a full-time dad and being present for my kids' lives, being an active member in my community, being able to support financially and otherwise organizations that I cared about and that I thought were doing good causes and that were going to positively impact relationships. And that to me was going to require, I felt like north of $10 million total over my lifetime, right? So I was like, okay, I probably need to get to like 20. 20 is probably my goal. $400 from a wholesale deal in Alabama a month is just not going to get me very close to 20 million very quickly. Mm-hmm. So I was like, what will? And to me, driving equity and forcing that net worth was the fastest way to compound your wealth growth, because the IRS isn't getting their hands on 15 or 20% every time you sell a property, because you're never selling. Ideally, you're refinancing and taking debt and continuing to then use that debt to drive bigger investments. Additionally, you're not eating up 6 to 8% of your costs with transaction costs, paying realtor fees, paying the county sales tax, paying all these things.
Sure.
You can lose 30% of your profits on a deal really quick, to the IRS and transaction fees. And I was like, if I'm doing these bigger deals, which I've figured out and I can help clients do, if I'm potentially making $500,000 and you're losing $125,000, $150,000 on every one, that value over the next 20 years of my life is going to be multiple millions of dollars. It's going to be $5, $7, $10 million alone. So I was like, if I drive net worth growth, I can get to a point where you can borrow against your portfolio. If you've got $10 million in equity in your assets, right? Bank of America or Wells Fargo or JP Morgan Chase, whomever it is going to lend you against your portfolio 40, 50% of that. So you can take $4 or $5 million if you wanted to at a low interest rate, 3.5% to 5.5%, depending upon where the economy is, because those are very stable assets, right? Banks like real estate. They like that your equity is tied up in a really stable asset class. You can turn around, because you've built the skill set through real estate investing, and invest that money that you've borrowed at 3.5% to 5.5% and make 12, 15, 17, 25% on that, right? And then the margin on that is $1 million, $2 million a year that you can use to actually invest towards the things that are going to make a meaningful difference for you. That might seem a little ethereal or like not very tangible to listeners, but it can grow rather quickly, in my opinion. And case in point, like all these clients I've helped in San Diego and many more that I haven't had a chance to meet yet that are doing the same thing and that are ADPI listeners. But you can grow millions of dollars of net worth in real estate, and it's very achievable. And then you can use that to do what you want. So for me, it was growing that net worth as quickly as possible, so that you get to the point where you can make decisions that are based on your values, not on your resources or constrained resources, as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And you hit on some really important factors there. One, recapturing your time, because it's really, really hard to be a full-time real estate investor when you don't have the time. I mean, when you're not in it, and it sounds stupid to say, but like it's true. And there's nothing wrong, for ADPI listeners who are like, oh, I'm just going to retire after 20 years of service. Like, totally do that. But if you're doing it right and you're preparing for your transition or your retirement, you shouldn't have to go and get another job. You should be able to do what you want to do post-retirement and live off of the cash flow and the equity and the net worth growth. One thing that you didn't mention that's another benefit of having a larger net worth is reaching accreditation status. Once you get over $1 million of net worth, guess what? You're an accredited investor. And when you become an accredited investor, the world opens up for you with opportunities, because to the way that the SEC writes laws, and we're going to be talking about this. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think when this episode's going to come out, but we're doing a passive investor power hour where Eric Upchurch and Eric's owns 4,600 doors himself. um, as both a GP and an LP. I think it's like GP is like 2000 something and LP is like 1800 something. They're about even. But anyway, he's going to be sharing all of the secrets on like, hey, this is how you become a passive investor. And these are the steps you need to take from where you are now to get accreditation to then what do you do with it and how do
Very
you vet
cool.
deals and blah, blah, blah. But like that knowledge, no one talks about that stuff, and it's almost seemed like it's like untouchable, it's unreachable for the military community to even think about that stuff. But the truth of the matter is, if you study it and you implement it, and Keegan, to your point, these things materialize much 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 quicker. And personally, like from my perspective, I've kind of hit the brakes. I mean, I do the Airbnbs, but I totally agree with you. Like, maybe we make 50, 75 grand a year from Airbnbs. Is that going to change our lives? No. It's going to like pay for our apartment and like, some of our lifestyle, but it's not like that's not life-changing cash flow for me. But what is the opportunity to revolutionize the way that the military community looks at passive investing through a reggae crowdfunding platform, and then we're able to go and own thousands and thousands of units. Like that is cool, and that's where I've been focusing my time personally, is like figuring out, okay, how can we do this, how can we make this a reality. But by acquiring that next level of focus and not being spread so thin, that's I think it's a true game changer. And it, if it lines up with your values and it lines up with everything that you were saying, Keegan, as far as like your goals and your values being aligned, you'll grow, you'll go further faster in that direction. And before you know it, you're going to get really, really good at doing that thing.
Yeah, and there's maybe you want to hit on this for a second too, Kevin. There's a ton of value to being a limited partner in a deal. If you're listening to this and you're like, we've got 3 or 4 kids at home, right? One of us stays at home. One of us is going for career advancement and is super busy with that. This sounds like way too much. I would say it probably could be. I'm not going to say it is. I'm not going to give you that easy of an out, because I think anybody can do this. Can, convert a garage or buy a $1.2 million duplex and add value to it by doing some basic improvements. But if you don't want to do that, there's so many advantages, to your point, Kevin, of being a limited partner in a deal. I've done 3 commercial syndications where I'm a general partner. I've invested in more as a limited partner. Something that, Kevin, you and I tap into, and probably a lot of ADPI listeners, like really avid ones, are tracking, is accelerating bonus depreciation to try to limit their tax burden. But you can't do that if you're a passive investor only and you're not actively involved in real estate, right? Unless you invest in commercial syndications, ADPIs, or I do a couple a year, or other investors that because then you can take that K1 where you're going to get depreciation, right? Your LP as well. And you can take that against your active W-2 income to limit your tax burden, which is really powerful. So I thought I'd throw that out there. I think it's a huge benefit that often gets overlooked.
It's a tremendous benefit. And it's called the real estate professional status. And we're going to be talking about that on our webinar as well. So I don't know, this will probably come out maybe after that. The webinar is on June 22nd, but guys, if you want to listen to it, if you haven't heard of it until like literally right now, and you're like, crap, did I miss the webinar? Just know that there'll be a replay available. Actually, what I'll do is I'll throw it in the show notes, like the link to the replay, and then you'll just be able to sign up and watch it, because it is that powerful of a strategy. And when we're talking about using bonus depreciation and cost segregation to reduce and potentially eliminate your tax burden, I mean, you talk to the big boys and girls in real estate, they haven't paid federal income tax in 6, 7, 8 years. And can you imagine what their income is? I mean, when you get up to a certain point, I personally know a real estate investor who's very big in the commercial real estate and all facets of development and everything. And I sat down with lunch for him one day, and he was like, "Hey man, I have to move. I'm moving to Florida." And I was like, "Well, what are you moving to Florida? You live in Annapolis. You got this big mansion. Like, why are you going to move to Florida?" And he's like, "I am facing a $2.5 million tax bill this year. And that is with all of my cost segregation, like everything." It's like, I can't do it anymore. It's no longer sustainable. And so he bought a house in Naples, and, he's living the life down there, doing whatever. He's got family, 3 kids, the whole thing. But the point is that you can carry forward these tax losses and you can get involved in this. And it's just extremely, extremely powerful. And it's one of those secrets, how the rich stay wealthy, or whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, in the grand scheme of, we're talking net worth, Keegan, I think one underlying factor here is, it is not how much you make every year, it is how much you keep.
Oh, I emphatically agree. Yeah, I'll issue a public apology on this podcast to all the chiefs and senior enlisted who used to try to teach me about taxes when I was 23, 24, all the old heads. And I'd be like, dude, get out of here. I don't care. Nobody cares. Because I had this like just very fixed W-2 forever mindset, right? I talk about taxes more than anything. I plan my investments for the year based on my projected tax burden. I mean, it's like, it drives everything for me at this point. I'll also apologize to my sister, Mary Kate. I used to make fun of how much she watched HGTV, and now we watch home improvement shows like every night, whether it's Selling Sunset or the Appreciating Agency or whatever. So public apology issued there. Mary Kate's a Naval Academy grad too. She's an Alpha pilot, deployed in Australia right now. So sorry, MK. Wow. I'm following in your footsteps now.
watching HGTV. But Keegan, this has been absolutely incredible. I think we shared so much more insight, and there was, between the sample deals and what you're working on with this like super exciting 4 unit, and how you're layering these zoning rules. And it really, at the end of the day, it pays to understand what's going on in the law in your local community. Like, what it literally pays to understand how this is. And I understand that not every place is going to have these crazy ADU things, but that doesn't mean there's not something there that you can dig into and take advantage of, and just read the zoning codes and figure out, and talk to other investors and say, hey, how are you doing this? Is this possible? Because the last thing you want to do is build an unpermitted additional dwelling unit. And then, the zoning comes by, they do an inspection, like, you got to tear that thing down. Like, that is the absolute worst case scenario in my mind of like developing stuff that's unpermitted. So you don't want to do that, but you can look at what's going on locally and figure out what's the best move for me. So if you haven't listened to part 1 of this, please listen to part 1, because it's super powerful. It'll give you more background into Keegan and what he's, how he got his mind right as he was transitioning out of the Navy and out of a career in football. And man, you've been so inspiring. Any last words for our audience of military real estate investors?
Yeah, I think this episode we went into like big numbers, right? Which can be a little bit intimidating. So maybe I'd leave it with, San Diego is a unique place. It takes somebody who's got both development and real estate understanding. Like, developers don't really get real estate, and real estate agents don't really understand development most of the time. San Diego's got like this public kind of amnesty until 2025 if you do have unpermitted units, because they want to permit housing, right? So know your local market, get in touch with a local expert. And then you can do, as like a last word of wisdom, there's a lot of numbers that are less intimidating than spending $500,000 in development. I helped a client recently, who's also my cousin, buy a duplex here in Mission Hills for $1.16 million. His garage conversion will probably be about $60,000 to $80,000 total. But he's now got 3 units there. He lives in one, and the other 2 units are making him about 10 grand, because he is doing Airbnb. He's right by the airport. And his total debt on that place is like $7,600, $7,800. So he's cash flowing over $2 grand a month, plus paying down principal and living for free for a much smaller cash outlay. So there's smaller increments, right? There's steps to everything. I think everything drives back, Kevin, and I know that you would agree with this from listening to you, to getting to know and spending time with the right people, because it'll influence your decision so much. And you can make so much more money over that same period of time, or spend your time better on things you actually care about, instead of trying to do flips and wholesale deals like I did for a year and wasting a bunch of time and money. So that's what I would leave people with. Pursue people who have kind of the results that you're looking for, and they'll help you greatly save time and money in getting towards similar or different results if you change your goals,
That's awesome. Love it, Keegan. Guys, make sure you look Keegan up, have a conversation with him. His information is going to be in the show notes. And I'm sure we're going to have you on maybe sometime for a part 3 in the future. I don't know. There's always a lot to talk about with you, man. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come back on to do a part 2 with us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks.